It was very challenging at the beginning, coming up with a really effective, clear narrative value proposition for the reason why. Why would a care home use us? Why would anyone use us? That took us a lot of iteration, a lot of testing, and we started testing out the points that we were making, some of the wording that we were using to see what was landing.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Devika Wood, Chief Executive Officer of Brain Plus, the pioneers of digital cognitive stimulation therapy, the world-leading, evidence-based, non-drug dementia treatment. Devika's entrepreneurial journey spans the healthcare, life sciences, and investment sectors, where she worked with startups and large multinational corporations. She's been showcased in Forbes 30 Under 30 for healthcare and science, and in 2018 was named Entrepreneur of the Year by King's College London. Devika, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Now, it's really great to have you here. Before we get into Brain Plus, for anyone who might be listening to this who doesn't know, could you just say a little bit about CST, what it is, why it matters, what it does? Because I suspect that'll just help put everything else into context.
Absolutely. So CST is the short form for cognitive stimulation therapy. It is the world's leading non-drug intervention for dementia patients with mild to moderate dementia. It is shown and has been evidenced through many clinical trials to be as effective, if not more effective, than some of the drugs on the market. The way that it's delivered is a multimodal group therapy format. So you'll usually have between 5 to 8 individuals in a group setting, and they'll have to be diagnosed with dementia to be referred. And it's an activities-based framework, which essentially is made up of reminiscence, physical games, physical activities, music, and it's all guided in this construct of enabling the cognitive stimulation of people living with dementia. And it's proven to delay cognitive decline by up to 6 months. And it has a myriad of unbelievably magical side effects, none of which are negative. So it is pure magic.
Sorry. Having said that, you've got to name at least one of the magical side effects.
So first one, I would say, is improved communication. Mm-hmm. So those living with dementia, obviously those that have experienced a loved one living with dementia, communication becomes one of the most challenging experiences. Mm. And improved communication is one of those side effects that happen with cognitive stimulation therapy. Another one that's just come out through some really great research and evidence publications is a reduction in aggression and a reduction in anxiety.
That's really important. Wow.
Game changing. So that one for me is the one that I really think, if we can reduce the aggressive symptoms or side effects of dementia, that will have an incredible impact on those that are caring for people living with dementia, but the care staff on the front lines for people that are caring for dementia patients. So, yeah.
So if you don't mind, tell us a bit about Brain Plus and sort of your involvement with it. What drew you to it? How'd it get started? What's it trying to do? All those sorts of things.
Absolutely. So Brain Plus is headquartered in Denmark, Copenhagen. It's a public listed company, so it's IPO'd on the Nordic Stock Exchange a couple of years ago. It's not a £1 billion IPO. The founder and chief exec prior to me joining was a brilliant person who's led this company formidably over the last few years. Mm-hmm. Very much focused in the brain training cognitive space. And a couple of years ago, we got an opportunity to build a medical device or a technology software system that would enable CST to be scaled effectively. And so since then, we've worked really hard to get a medical device registration. And last year we decided as an organization, I came in as chief commercial officer, and there was a decision made to launch into the UK market. And about a month ago, I took over as CEO, which, to be fair, was one of those decisions from Kim where he said, I have done my job that I needed to get to where we are today. and we need someone with more commercial expertise to help build this business forward. I think it's, from a founder CEO, I think it's one of the most admirable things you can do, is to recognize what you do well and what you don't do well, and hand over the baton from your baby. And so, yeah, I've taken over the position, and that's where we are today, building into the UK ecosystem.
Mm. And why the UK? Because from a place of ignorance, it's not an obvious next step.
Yes, so the UK was a really interesting market for us. So CST is recommended by NICE guidelines. It's the only therapeutic for dementia patients to be recognised by the NICE guidelines, which means that it's actively commissioned in the NHS via memory assessment clinics for people that have been diagnosed with dementia, that they can be actively referred for CST. So it's embedded into a clinical pathway, which everyone that understands digital therapeutics, that understands getting digital therapeutics into the hands of patients, having something in a clinical pathway embedded and recommended by NICE is instrumental as that first step to get people to activate utilizing a digital therapeutic. And the other reason was because we saw a really, really incredible opportunity, not only by the NHS, but by the care home sector. There is a brilliant care home sector in the UK, private and public, local authority funded, and a remarkable opportunity for us to really deploy effective dementia care via the care home sector, and another opportunity for us to further support how people are demonstrating evidence for CQC. So there was a number of different pieces of the puzzle that came together that made the UK market for us extremely attractive.
And so the purpose of Brain Plus, I mean, I'm sure at one level it's pretty obvious, but how did it come about? When did it crystallize? You've been the CEO for a month, so congratulations. But, congratulations to a CEO always comes with a certain sense of commiseration.
I'll take that one.
But how did the purpose come about, and how might it have changed over time?
So the business perspective, in terms of where the business decided to position themselves as an expert in developing sort of a dementia care platform, we'd got a really amazing opportunity for some European grant funding. And one of the biggest sort of KOLs, key opinion leader or CST experts, was in Denmark. And there was a real opportunity to bring CST into the digital age. It has been a very archaic sort of traditional methodology of delivering CST, very paper-based. So when you become trained in CST, there is a huge manual or handbook that as a facilitator, you then need to go to and come up with the activities utilizing the framework of CST and the methodology behind CST to then plan for these activities that you are meant to deliver 2 sessions per week over 7 weeks. So the real kind of burning desire was to enable CST to be scalable and enable it to be delivered in a way that it was standardized and really easy for people to basically get going and deliver these group sessions. So that was the first sort of impetus around why we decided to go into this area. We saw a really unique opportunity. From a personal perspective, why I sort of became involved in Brain Plus and why I fell in love with it. So I cared for my nanny for 12 years who had dementia. And when I realized what this product could do, what this therapy could do, it would have completely changed my life, my family's life, and my nanny's life if she'd had access to a therapy like this. And so it really did something inside of me, that mission-driven purpose, being and soul that I have, to really throw myself into it and make sure that people have access to it.
So you mentioned kind of this key opinion leader coming to Brain Plus. What was Brain Plus at that point? Because in my mind, Brain Plus and the CST thing are the same, which maybe they're not.
No, so before we looked into the CST space, we were looking at brain training apps. There was no real focus on dementia patients, but we were really, really interested in the space of brain training, cognitive stimulation, supporting everyday populations to live healthier, better. We've got an incredible team of neuroscientists, PhDs, cognitive behavior specialists who were all really passionate about this space of neuro brain training. And it just pulled together that expertise with a real market need around developing solutions for people living with dementia that became that solution that was really needed in the market.
I mean, is Brain Plus, the CST thing, something I could go download and put on my phone now, or do you have to buy it?
So you can go onto the App Store and you can download it, but because the way that CST should be delivered, it requires training. So you're required to be trained in CST. That being said, to be trained in CST, you don't need to have any clinical background, which is the beauty of this again, that low barrier to scaling. And the demographic or the kind of construct of what makes the CST therapy so effective is really also baked in that group therapy element. So where you probably can do it yourself, and if you were to be able to get some training in it, you could probably deliver it to your loved one in your own home setting, one-on-one. We are working towards developing a solution that will support that. But in its current construct, it is group delivery, group therapy, which is what makes the care home sector so attractive for us.
Sure. And what's the biggest challenge Brain Plus as a business faces right now?
So I think the biggest challenge is around awareness. CST has been around for 20 plus years. It was developed by a professor called Professor Amy Spector out of UCL in London, one of the best universities. It's been evidenced, there's been multiple publications around it. You know, all the evidence around CST suggests that it has an incredible effectiveness, clinical outcomes, cost effectiveness is high, but there really is a low awareness of CST existing in the market. And whenever you're selling a service or a solution or a product, getting over that hurdle of people being aware of what you're doing and then having to sell is really challenging. But saying that, you know, once you get that mass awareness, you can really start to make an impact. So for us at the moment, we're in that awareness building stage, trying to get people to understand and know about CST. And then we can really start to get that traction that we know that we can have.
It sounds to me like part of what you might be aiming for, you can tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong, is getting not just people who are, say, in the care sector or in kind of the core of the NHS to be aware of CST. They probably know that, but to understand that there's this technology that can make it easier. But it seems to me it's also to get people who are carers, who have family members, whatever, to basically pitch up and go, we should be doing this.
Absolutely, hit the nail on the head. It's about advocacy and empowerment and empowering individuals to be aware of opportunities, solutions, services that are available. You know, on a daily basis, I have people contacting me at least 3 times a day saying, my loved one's got dementia, my dad's got dementia, my grandma's got dementia. I don't know what to do. I don't know what the steps are. I don't know where we should be going. And it's that real lack of awareness around dementia that people struggle with, because as soon as you get that diagnosis, it really does feel like you have a really long death sentence, because all of the headlines are saying these drugs are being rejected by NICE because they are not cost effective. You know, the target market for these drugs is only about 70,000 people. But by deploying this drug, lecanemab or Leqembi via the NHS would cost the economy 1.2 billion pounds just to give this drug to a very small percentage of the market. You know, those headlines are dangerous, really dangerous. And some of the news articles I've seen, especially from the BBC, has suggested that there are no alternative solutions out there. So it's scaremongers, because there are alternative solutions out there. In fact, even taking aside CST, putting CST into a box, there are multiple different things out there that an individual living with dementia can do. There is a lot of taboo around dementia, a lot of nervousness, fear, and I think that's really sad. You know, the point that you get diagnosed with dementia as a family, your automatic brain, I think, goes to, right, we're going to have to get lots of care. We're going to have to sell the house, going to have to find an institution to put my loved one in. It's going to be really challenging. How are we all going to cope? Those things don't have to be the most immediate thoughts in your mind. But unfortunately, as a society, we have created a real fear around the word dementia. And I think that's really sad because it shouldn't be that way. Actually, there are certain things out there that you can do as a loved one, as a family member, to support the person living with dementias so their cognitive decline isn't so rapid, and they're supported in ways that can help them. It's just about market mapping and making sure that people are aware and empowered to know so they can make informed decisions and go to the right services, right charity organisations, and to the NHS and say, this is what I think would be good. How can you signpost me to these solutions? So I think that is really important. Advocacy is hugely important.
But it does seem to me that, if somebody has dementia, I might feel like I don't actually know, how to interact with this person, because normal, whatever that means, is where I'd start from, but that might not always be the best way.
Yeah, 100%. This is what we're so passionate about, the science behind CST. The fact that this therapy isn't just about actively delivering the therapy. The methodology behind CST is baked in how you communicate, things that you can say, activities that you can do in a structured format, that I personally believe if every single person who had a loved one living with dementia had some sort of training in CST, it would help them to communicate, to manage, to support their loved ones. I remember with my nanny when she would have aggressive outbursts, because that's one of the most common symptoms. Unfortunately, nowadays, and it has been happening for years, you tend to put people living with dementia on antipsychotic medication, memory medication that supports their memories, and sometimes antidepressants, because that's the symptoms that also come with living with dementia. But those antipsychotic medications, they have massive impacts on people's abilities to communicate. Aggressive behavior sometimes becomes even heightened. And sometimes when she was having aggressive outbursts, I was so young, I genuinely wouldn't know what to do. It would terrify me because there was this person that brought me up, and all of a sudden she would swear, she would look so agitated. And I've been looking at how, some of the things in CST, some of the kind of questions. So there's things that you can do where it's almost like a distraction methodology. So, you could show them a picture. This image is a childhood game. What does this remind you of? Do you remember playing childhood games when you were younger? Oh, what color was that yo-yo that you played with? Did your sister used to play with you? Where did you used to do it? Did you do it outside? Oh, what color was the grass? And those sort of questions help that person to come back into the present, think about the past, stabilize them. It's very similar, and I don't want to sound patronizing, but very similar to how you deal with toddlers that are having tantrums. The biggest things that they say is that distraction mechanism. It's distracting, it's bringing them back into that present, thinking about conversations and narratives. And CST is this really amazing framework for how you can sort of bring in these guided, facilitated questions, utilizing imagery, utilizing games that enables that person to sort of come back in and ground themselves. Yeah, I think it's absolutely wonderful, and it's a very valid point that you've made.
Obviously, it's an important, difficult, and kind of in some ways interesting challenge. Coming back to the business for a minute, if you had to describe the strategy for Brain Plus right now, what would you say the strategy is?
It goes sort of twofold. I think the biggest kind of key point that we are trying to solve here is awareness. So bringing in awareness to CST to make sure that people understand the benefits, the values, and that it does exist. The second point to it is then bringing that awareness of CST into awareness of the value proposition of what Ayla does in a way that is really simple and layman's language that people don't get terrified by. So that would go hand in hand. And then the kind of bit about then driving our commercial strategy, trying to bring it to people's hands, is care home sector is the number one for us. The biggest point that we have there is, we want to upskill the care workers. We want to deploy evidence-based therapy within the care home sector so that we can fundamentally improve outcomes across those living with dementia. And then through deploying that effectively, we get a mass market. We then have an idea around how we could probably work with the NHS through a community place-based care approach. So if we can get that mass market through the care home sectors, we want then the memory assessment clinics to basically work with the care homes to support effective sort of referrals into that community place-based care approach model. So that's our current strategy and what we're doing. A strategy is only as good as how you're executing it, right? There's like learnings and there's pivots and there's iterations. So far, it's going okay. I'd give ourselves a 6 out of 10.
And how long's that been the strategy?
So this has been our strategy since December last year, 6 months. It was very challenging at the beginning, coming up with a really effective, clear narrative value proposition for the reason why. Why would a care home use us? Why would anyone use us? That took us a lot of iteration, a lot of testing, and we started testing out the points that we were making, some of the wording that we were using to see what was landing. And we've then sort of continuously tried to iterate it and improve on it. We've been very lucky that we've had some amazing advisors join us. Aside from the kind of key board, we had an incredible advisor who's now joined the board called Vishal Shah. He had worked a lot in the health and social care space. And so he brought a wealth of knowledge about what language lands. And then most recently, we had Anthony Hall join us, who was a former lead inspector for CQC London, who then has brought an even better, clearer narrative around how we can inform the care homes to understand that this is something that needs to be used rather than a want, it's a need that you need to have in order to now really evidence outcomes for CQC. So those two have kind of come hand in hand to really refine our messaging, which has helped us to get closer and better at the key thing, which is getting people to understand and sell and buy the service into care homes.
Digital health is a space that, as I'm sure you know, there's lots of scrutiny over ethics and access and data. So where does purpose for your business show up in the middle of that? Does it make any difference, or do you get the same kind of questions?
It's an interesting point. So we are a Class 1 medical device, UKCA marked Class 1. So we don't diagnose or treat, which is obviously a Class 2. And the outcome data that we collect is very much around pre and post cognitive function using some very standardized tests. We collect satisfaction data from the care workers who are delivering CST and the family members of these loved ones living with dementia and the end user. We get it from those living with dementia. So when it comes to kind of data ethics, effectively making sure that we are not doing anything unscrupulous, that we're not using data in the incorrect way, having that Class 1 medical device means that we are really strict and having to adhere to some very tight protocols and regulations. So we have a QMS system, and we've set up with a third party called Eightfold that do overall governance and our regulatory stuff. So we're very watertight there. I think that in itself helps us to have that rigor and that formalized standing, that people know that we're not just an app that's there. And I think that's the importance of having these device regulatory elements, because you have to go through a very, very strict, very tough few months, up to a year sometimes, especially for Class 2, to pass them. And then I think on top of that, the NHS is now bringing in a lot more regulatory compliance assessment framework that you need to kind of have and pass off in order to work with the NHS as a provider or a supplier. So there's a number of different frameworks and assessment frameworks that are out there now that make sure that as a user, as someone that's buying a solution, you can check that digital health suppliers have hit these regulations. So yeah, I think it's really critical to make sure that, especially in the space that we're in, which is aged care, frailty, vulnerable people, that you're doing things very much above board, you're very transparent, and you're very open in the way that you're doing things.
One other sort of parallel in some ways, you're publicly listed. There are some people anyway who see sort of a tension between the typical interests of a public investor and being purpose-based. Do you experience that? How does that show up? Or is it just, it's not there at all?
So this was one of my biggest concerns when I joined Brain Plus, if I'm honest. I felt like there was a noose around my neck. I was terrified, absolutely terrified about being part of a public listed company, because I'd heard horror stories And it was well above what I thought was my skill set. I'm very used to operating in the private market, how to manage shareholders when it's behind a closed gate within a private market company, because, you'll only tell your shareholders news. Everything else doesn't need to be shared. In a public listed company, you have a number of regulations, a number of governance protocols that you've got to adhere to. The way that you message things is very, very clear. You can't say things that you don't stick to. You can't overinflate valuations and revenue targets. So it's terrifying. But on top of that, we've been really lucky that we've got a lot of incredible investors, incredible shareholders that are all driven by our mission, philanthropic, because they've either probably experienced it in their families, or they really believe in our purpose. So we've been really lucky to have just the most amazing support from people that are on our shareholder and investor base. And our board are phenomenal as well. We've got an incredible group of individuals around this mission. Probably one of the best I've ever interacted with, actually, which is amazing. Yeah, so I don't feel like I'm torn between having a mission-driven business and purpose-driven business and an institution or a setup that's there to make us fail. In fact, I think it's the opposite. And that's an incredible way to feel as a CEO, especially, that you feel so supported and empowered.
Absolutely. Changing the subject a little bit, if you were advising your younger self, somebody starting out in their career, what might you say to them about building a purposeful career?
Do you know what? When you have a purposeful career or a mission-driven business or a mission-driven purpose that sets your heart on fire and you can't think of anything else apart from what you're doing because it's come from somewhere that you've personally experienced it, and so you make it your utmost goal, you don't let go of it. That's the problem. It's really hard to think, if something's not going well, most likely you're not going to let go of it. You will keep going even if it kills you and even if it breaks you. I don't know whether that's necessarily healthy or not. I think that mentality or drive helps people go through some of the biggest challenges and come over those challenges because they haven't given up. So that's wonderful. But, often I've been in places where I'm like, this is so hard. Do I keep going? And the answer is always yes. So I'd say to my younger self, probably keep doing what you're doing, keep doing it. Because every time I see the impact that we have on just one individual, one resident, one person living with dementia, I just think, oh my God, this is so worth it. It gives me so much happiness that all of that horrible challenges and hardship just goes out the window. So it's so worth it. And if you can change one person's life, doesn't that mean that you've done something impactful in this world? Yeah.
I think that's great advice. It does, I think, posit what for some people is probably one of the biggest challenges of their lives, which is, what do I really care enough about? Because without that, you don't go down that road. Some people find it early, and I think some people can spend a lot of their life looking for that thing that is, that's going to give them that enduring kind of interest and drive.
Yeah. 100%. I totally agree with you. I think experiencing what I did with my nanny for 12 years was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. But actually, when I look back on it, I think that I was given that challenge for a reason. And now when I go through some stuff and I think that this is really difficult, I just think back to her and I think back to those moments with her. And I just think I'm going to do something that is going to change this for other families. That drive, like you said, that purpose to get up in the morning, to find that is magical, right? Because some people don't have that.
There's some people who, they have it, they just kind of reject it for whatever reason. It's self-survival, whatever. I don't want to be owned by some purpose, bigger than me.
God, no, that's a very insightful. So many things that I could say to that. It's unbelievable. I think whenever I meet entrepreneurs, the ones I meet that I'm so inspired by, or I think, wow, it's people that have experienced something themselves, or they've experienced something that they're, someone they've loved dearly has gone through. And when you look at the way that they've shaped their strategy or shaped their product or shaped their mission, purpose, values, everything they live by, there's something that's in it that it just glitters. It really glitters. There's something in it that you think, even if this doesn't become multi-millions, you can see that the way that they're doing things is just so impactful. Even by telling their stories, that in itself is powerful because you're going to inspire somebody else that's gone through that to not feel alone. So some people have the ability to step into that. Some people maybe think that's not for me, and that's fine. That's fine because you do have to have guts to do some of this stuff.
Well, and I suspect something that I think you've got, I think we've seen it here, is a certain kind of lightness in the midst of all of that, who can walk into what could be a rather dire, depressing, and somehow find the levity, the ability to have some joy in the midst of it.
Yeah, thank you. That's so kind.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey and what you're trying to do. If somebody wanted to learn more about CST or about how they could be an advocate, where would they go?
LinkedIn, so Brain Plus on LinkedIn, or they can go onto our website, which is www.brain-plus.com. Or we've got one specifically for our Ayla platform, which is the CST assistant, and that's ayla-care.com. So either of those ways.
We'll make sure we put those in the show notes. Just make it easy. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.